The laughter that followed Derek's cruel joke echoed through the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel like a pack of hyenas circling wounded prey. I stood outside the entrance to my 25-year high school reunion, my hand frozen on the ornate door handle, listening to my ex-husband's voice boom through the sound system. "Come on. You all remember Linda." Derek's voice carried that same mocking tone he'd perfected during our marriage. "Sweet, reliable Linda. Though I hear she's still single at 43. I guess some people are just too old for love, right?" The crowd's laughter felt like a physical blow. Through the glass doors, I could see the reunion in full swing, my former classmates dressed in their finest, reliving their glory days while Derek held court at the microphone like the class clown he'd always been. He'd volunteered to be the evening's MC, probably knowing it would give him the perfect platform to humiliate me in front of everyone we'd grown up with. I'd almost stayed home. After the divorce 2 years ago, after Derek's very public affair with his 28-year-old secretary, after the custody battle that painted me as a bitter, vindictive ex-wife, the thought of facing our old friends felt overwhelming. But something stubborn in me had refused to be erased from my own history, refused to let Derek's narrative be the only one that mattered. What Derek didn't know was that I wasn't the same broken woman he'd left behind, and I wasn't walking into that reunion alone. The 2 years since my divorce had been a journey of rediscovering who I was beneath the layers of Derek's expectations and criticisms. Our marriage had been a slow suffocation disguised as suburban stability, 20 years of being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much in every way that mattered. Derek had been my high school sweetheart, the charming quarterback who'd swept me off my feet when we were 17. Back then, his confidence had seemed attractive, his take-charge attitude romantic. I'd been the quiet girl who felt lucky to be chosen by someone so popular, so sure of himself. But confidence had curdled into arrogance over the years, and charm had become manipulation. Derek had systematically undermined my self-worth, convincing me that I was fortunate he'd stayed with someone so ordinary, so unremarkable, so fundamentally unlovable. When he'd finally left for his secretary, he'd made it clear that the problem was me, my age, my appearance, my inability to keep up with his evolving needs. "Face it, Linda," he'd said during one particularly brutal argument, "you're not the girl I married. You've let yourself go. You've become comfortable. And comfortable isn't attractive." The divorce had been devastating, not just financially but emotionally. Derek had painted himself as the victim of a loveless marriage, while I'd been cast as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't accept that relationships sometimes run their course. Our mutual friends had mostly sided with him, charmed by his version of events and uncomfortable with the messy reality of a woman's pain. But something remarkable had happened in those 2 years of rebuilding. Without Derek's constant criticism, I'd begun to remember who I was. I'd started painting again, something I'd given up when Derek declared it impractical. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see. I'd made new friends who valued my kindness, my intelligence, my sense of humor. And 6 months ago, I'd met someone who saw me not as a faded version of my younger self, but as a woman who'd grown more beautiful with experience, more interesting with age, more worthy of love because of everything I'd survived. Standing outside that ballroom, listening to Derek's cruel commentary about my supposed unlovability, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to avoid the confrontation and judgment that awaited inside. The old Linda would have done exactly that, slipped away quietly, protecting herself from further humiliation. But I wasn't the old Linda anymore. The woman who'd emerged from the wreckage of my marriage was stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth. I'd spent 2 years learning to love myself again, and I wasn't going to let Derek's cruelty undo that progress. Through the glass doors, I could see the reunion in full swing. My former classmates looked older, softer around the edges, but still recognizable as the people I'd grown up with. Some had aged gracefully, others showed the wear of difficult years, but all of them seemed to be enjoying themselves, caught up in the nostalgia of shared memories. Derek commanded the center of attention, as he always had. He'd maintained his athletic build, his hair was still thick though now silver at the temples, and he wore his success like an expensive suit. His real estate business had thrived after our divorce, and he'd made sure everyone knew about his new life, his young girlfriend, his apparent happiness. You know what they say, Derek continued his monologue, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. There's nothing sadder than a woman who can't accept that her time has passed. Some people just don't know when to gracefully exit the stage. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable now, as if some people were beginning to realize that Derek's humor had crossed a line from playful to cruel. But he seemed oblivious to the shift in mood, too caught up in his own performance to notice that his audience was growing uncomfortable. That's when I made my decision. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the glass door one final time, and reached for the handle. It was time to make my entrance. But first, I turned to the man standing beside me in the shadows. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. James Mitchell asked softly, his hand gentle on my shoulder. At 51, James was everything Derek wasn't: kind where Derek was cruel, thoughtful where Derek was impulsive, secure enough in himself to celebrate my strengths instead of feeling threatened by them. We'd met at a grief counseling group, both of us rebuilding our lives after devastating losses, mine from divorce, his from the death of his wife after a long battle with cancer. Our relationship had grown slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than the desperate need that had characterized my youth. "I don't need to prove anything to them," I said, as much to convince myself as to answer his question. I could walk away right now and be perfectly happy. And it was true. The life I'd built over the past 2 years was full and meaningful in ways my marriage had never been. I had work I loved as a freelance graphic designer, friendships that nourished my soul, and a relationship with James that made me feel valued and cherished. But standing there, listening to Derek reduce me to a punchline, I realized this wasn't about proving anything to my former classmates. It was about refusing to be erased from my own story. Derek was rewriting our shared history, painting himself as the victim of a marriage to a woman who'd become unlovable with age. He was using our past to entertain people who'd known me when I was young and full of dreams. "I spent 20 years letting him define me," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I let him convince me that I was lucky to be loved by someone like him, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection he threw my way. I'm not going to let him define me now." James smiled, his eyes warm with understanding and pride. "Then let's go remind them who you really are." He was right. It was time to stop hiding from Derek's narrative and start living my own truth. Time to show everyone, including myself, that being 43 and divorced didn't make me pitiable or finished or too old for love. It made me free. I pushed open the ballroom doors with confidence I'd forgotten I possessed, James beside me, both of us stepping into the warm glow of the reunion's ambient lighting. The conversation near the entrance died first, a ripple of recognition spreading through the crowd as people noticed my arrival. Derek was still at the microphone, in the middle of another story about his post-divorce adventures, when the murmur of voices began to distract him. He looked up from his notes, scanning the crowd to see what had captured their attention, and his eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom. The expression that crossed his face was priceless: shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. This wasn't the broken, defeated woman he'd expected to see. This was someone he didn't recognize. Someone who carried herself with grace and confidence. Someone who looked genuinely happy. Linda, the name escaped his lips before he could stop it, carrying clearly through the microphone to every corner of the ballroom. The crowd turned as one to look at me, and I felt the weight of their collective gaze. But instead of the shame and humiliation I'd expected, I felt something else entirely. Power. The power that comes from knowing your own worth, from being loved by someone who sees your value, from refusing to accept someone else's definition of your limitations. I walked further into the room, James's presence beside me steady and reassuring. Conversation stopped as we passed, people staring with the fascination that comes from witnessing an unexpected plot twist in a familiar story. "Well," Derek said into the microphone, his voice slightly strained as he tried to regain his composure. "Look who decided to join us after all." He attempted his usual charming smile, but it came out forced, uncertain. The crowd was silent now, sensing drama, waiting to see how this unexpected encounter would unfold. Some faces showed curiosity, others embarrassment at having laughed at Derek's earlier jokes, and a few displayed genuine warmth at seeing me again. But it was the expression on Derek's face that told the real story. For the first time in our relationship, he was the one who felt uncertain, off balance, unsure of how to proceed. The woman he'd dismissed as too old for love had just walked into the room radiating confidence and accompanied by a man who clearly adored her. The tables had turned, and everyone in the room could feel it. What happened next would become the defining moment of the evening, the story that would be retold at coffee shops and dinner parties for months to come. Instead of shrinking away from Derek's attention or trying to avoid the confrontation, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I walked directly toward the stage. The crowd parted before me like the Red Sea, conversations dying mid-sentence as people realized they were about to witness something extraordinary. Derek's face went from confused to alarmed as he watched me approach, his grip tightening on the microphone as if it were a lifeline. "Derek," I said when I reached the edge of the stage, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustics. "I couldn't help but overhear your commentary about my love life." The silence in the room was absolute. 200 people holding their breath, waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly unprepared for this direct confrontation. "I think there might be some confusion," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "You see, you've been telling everyone that I'm too old for love, that I'm some sad, desperate woman who can't accept that her time has passed." Derek tried to interrupt. "Linda, but here's the thing," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You're absolutely right about one thing. My time did pass. My time of accepting less than I deserved, of believing that I was lucky to be loved by someone who treated me like a burden, of thinking that my worth was determined by someone else's opinion." The crowd was transfixed now, some people nodding in recognition, others looking uncomfortable as they realized they'd been complicit in Derek's narrative. "That time is definitely over," I announced, turning to gesture toward James, who was watching with pride and love written clearly across his face. "Because I've learned something important over the past 2 years. I'm not too old for love. I was just with the wrong person." The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. Derek's face had gone from pale to red, his carefully constructed image of the successful divorce who'd escaped an unhappy marriage crumbling before everyone's eyes. "James," I called out, extending my hand toward him. "Would you join me?" James walked through the crowd with quiet dignity, his presence commanding respect without demanding attention. When he reached me, he took my hand with the gentle reverence of someone who understood exactly how precious what he held was. "Everyone," I said, turning back to address the room, "I'd like you to meet Dr. James Mitchell, the man who taught me that real love doesn't diminish with age, it deepens. That wisdom and experience don't make a woman less desirable, they make her more interesting. That 43 isn't too old for anything, it's exactly the right age to know what you want and refuse to settle for less." Derek stood frozen at the microphone, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The man who'd spent the evening mocking my supposed unlovability was now face to face with the evidence of just how wrong he'd been. "So thank you, Derek," I concluded, my voice ringing with genuine gratitude, "for setting me free to find someone who actually deserves me." The standing ovation that followed was spontaneous and thunderous. It started with my old friend Sarah from the back of the room, then spread like wildfire until the entire ballroom was on its feet, applauding not just my words but the courage it had taken to speak them. Derek stood at the microphone in stunned silence, his evening of entertainment at my expense having backfired spectacularly. Several classmates approached him afterward, their expressions making it clear that his behavior had crossed a line from humor into cruelty. But the most meaningful reactions came from the women in the room, classmates who'd also faced divorce, who'd been told they were past their prime, who'd struggled with society's messages about aging and worth. They surrounded me throughout the evening, sharing their own stories of rediscovering themselves after loss, of finding love again after heartbreak, of refusing to accept that their best years were behind them. You gave us all permission to believe in ourselves again. My old friend Maria told me as the evening wound down. To believe that we're not finished just because we're not 25 anymore. James and I danced to the reunion's final song, swaying together while Derek sat alone at the bar, his earlier bravado completely deflated. As we moved across the dance floor, I caught glimpses of our reflection in the ballroom's mirrors, a woman who looked confident and radiant, dancing with a man who clearly cherished her. "Any regrets about coming tonight?" James asked as the music played. "None," I replied, and meant it completely. I needed to do this, not for them, but for me. To prove to myself that I'm not the woman Derek tried to convince me I was. "And what did you prove?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "That love doesn't have an expiration date. That confidence is the most attractive quality anyone can possess. And that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well." That night, I learned that the most powerful response to someone trying to diminish you isn't anger or argument, it's simply showing up as your authentic, thriving self and letting your happiness speak for itself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told you're too old for love, dreams, or new beginnings, remember this: age is not a limitation, it's an accumulation of wisdom, strength, and self-knowledge that makes you more valuable, not less. Your best chapters may still be unwritten. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to start over, to find love, or to refuse someone else's definition of your worth. Subscribe for more stories about women who discover that their most beautiful years come not from youth, but from the confidence that comes with knowing exactly who they are. Sometimes the most powerful moment in our lives is when we stop accepting other people's limitations and start living our own truth.